Jy luister na RSG Geldsaake met Moneyweb potgoeie met gasheer Ryk van die Kerk.
Die Medediningskommissie het verlede week 'n markondersoek na die waardeketting in die Suid-Afrikaanse pluimveebedryf van stapel gestuur. Nou, die waardeketting strek van die produksie van voer, eiers, dagoue kuikens, braaihoenders tot die slagpale en die bemarking van hoenderprodukte. Die kommissie sê die bedryf is uiters gekonsentreerd en dat die 4 grootste produsente in die land sowat 63% van alle hoenderprodukte produseer. En hierdie produsente is Astral, RCL, Country Bird en Sovereign. Hoender en eiers is baie belangrik in die Suid-Afrikaanse mark, want omtrent 65% van alle proteïen wat Suid-Afrikaners inneem, kom van hoenders en eiers. Nou, ons gaan vanaand na albei kante van die storie luister. Ek gaan eers gesels met James Hodge, hy is die hoofekonoom van die kommissie, en dan met Chris Skutte, die uitvoerende hoof van Astral. James, thank you so much for your time today. Just give us a bit of background. Why did the commission launch this market inquiry?
Maybe to start with, it's important to locate what is an inquiry versus an investigation, because they're very different instruments. So a market inquiry, you could say, is almost a tool used to try and improve competition. It's not an investigation of a single firm and necessarily individual conduct. It looks at a market holistically, and we are able to look at the suppliers to that industry as well as the customers and how their conduct also affects on this industry. So I think, as you indicated in your introduction, the poultry industry is an incredibly important industry, not just on the production side for the economy and the jobs and value add it creates, but also for the consumer. It is such an important protein. And whilst we recognize this industry has had short-term challenges from exactly load shedding and avian flu, we're taking more the longer-term perspective of this industry. And I think the important question with an industry of this size and nature is whether there are factors that are impeding competition that either might be pushing prices higher than they ought to be, hurting consumers, or keeping out others who also want to participate in this industry and grow and bring some rivalry and dynamism to it. But it is that context as it has formed posed focus areas. So all we've done at the moment is release a draft terms of reference. So it is precisely to get that consultation, get that feedback. But the focus is probably, I would say, twofold. The one is around some of the, let's call it exactly those suppliers and customers to the industry. So the inputs and routes to market. And this is in recognition that things like feed are an enormous part of the cost, as well as the day-old chicks and the genetic material that feeds into that. Those are big cost drivers. So in the supply of that, and it may be even further upstream in that supply, such as feed into the maize, the vitamins, the antibiotics, and other things that go into that, are we seeing competitive markets? And as we outline in that proposed terms of reference, there are concentration right up into the global sphere there. The other focus area is really on smaller and independent and regional producers, and that is probably the bigger focus of this inquiry. So really, I suppose our questions are being asked at the moment, which is, do they face competitive supply of inputs, and are they able to get access to markets, including not just retail, but also your quick service restaurants, your others? And these are things that, in fact, the South African Poultry Association has identified in its own surveys, that some of those smaller players precisely battle to get quality day-old chicks. They have concern about reasonably priced feed and medicines, and they're concerned about independent abattoir access and also access to retail. And I suppose the thinking here is that, that is a different part of the market, maybe to some of the big players, but it's probably an important part of the market that supplies certain localized or regional areas and different channels.
Market concentration is a complicated field within the competition legislation because it differs from industry to industry. For example, it's highly concentrated in the vehicle manufacturing industry. And I'm sure the poultry industry will tell you, listen, economies of scale is critical to produce chicken as cheaply as possible. And I've seen the industry already indicating that they produce some of the cheapest chicken in the world. Is there a benchmark for concentration within the perspectives of the Commission?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. This is complex and often is determined by things like the capital structure, exactly as you said, maybe some of the potential for economies of scale. And there is a mantra that concentration doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. And that's why there's not an investigation, there's an inquiry that we're exploring here. But I think what features we picked up just in the terms of reference in which we were considering exploring here is the fact that the poultry industry is quite interesting because there is a lot of, in fact, contract growing. So whilst one may say scale economies, there's also outsourced to much smaller players, but that contracting does tie them into the larger business that then has the access to those retail markets and quick service restaurants. And those sort of arrangements may or may not prevent independent competitors emerging. And of course, we can question the benefit of those independents as well. But as I said, they may play an important role, or it may spread the benefits of the growth of this industry. But those sort of contracting, for instance, have come under a lot of antitrust or competition exposure in the US, and there's been a number of cases being run there. And the other is just where, because they are vertically integrated, the only question we're asking there at the moment is whether the fact that you supply yourself and your competitors, does that mean that those competitors are also getting fair access and fair pricing or fair quality? And that's a natural question one asks of any vertically integrated player. The fact is, in some areas, these big players have third parties competing, and we're certainly interested in that broader dynamic. But in other areas, they're the only one. So it is a fair question, we think, to be asking in this context. But there's no preconceived notion of what we will find. I think, to go back, this is too important an industry to not be asking some of these questions and at least ensuring they're answered, even if it's to say we're happy that that is not an issue.
The industry was quite surprised when the announcement was made of this inquiry. And as you alluded to earlier, they said, listen, it's a very tough industry to be in. But there is a poultry sector master plan, a plan which came about through negotiations with government. And this plan is supposed to set the roadmap for this industry going forward. How does this master plan tie in with this inquiry?
We view them as more complementary. I mean, a master plan is, in a sense, a plan devised between government and certainly the lead in the industry, and often for more industrial policy purposes. So that plan looks at how can we expand the industry to create more jobs and value add in South Africa, how we can generate more demand also in other markets, and deals with the issues around tariffs, which have been quite a contentious area because of precisely that balance between consumer interests and producers. But we don't see a master plan as fundamentally trying to look at whether there are features affecting competition in the market. And that is our mandate and our role. And I think in a negotiation between industry and government, that is not likely to be a central element of trying to improve output, localize production. So we see it as complementary, and certainly because we know, and we've acknowledged because we've looked at this in our essential food price monitoring reports, the industry has battled in competitiveness. There has been this very high profile tension between imposing the tariffs and increasingly more tariffs versus the consumer effect of that. So that's why we think whilst you've got a master plan and you've got a tariff policy, this is a third piece of the puzzle in many respects, that we need to ensure that at least the competition side is working, especially for all players in the market, not just about a couple, just so that when we do look at what we need on the tariff side, we're not leaving out the fact that we could have improved something internally, especially if it's an input or route to market or distribution, especially if it may be, as I said, more local or regionalized markets where smaller players can bring lower prices because they've got lower costs, even if it's just logistics otherwise, to consumers.
I know sometimes the Commission undertakes investigations following a complaint. Did this process start due to a complaint from the industry or outside the industry?
No, so the inquiry is often initiated based on our research and also engagement with maybe a broader set and what is important to consumers or the economy at a particular point in time. So we have done a lot of work in poultry. I mean, we have had historic cases. We've settled cases of cartel. We've had industry complaining about other players in the industry. So we've had historical complaints that have been resolved around being tied into buying your breeding stock from your competitor. So there has been that aspect, which suggests that this is an industry that's not without a competition, not necessarily a concern, but not without competition issues that might surface in different ways. So I think it has been in the context, certainly, of the importance of this industry, of the persistence of some of the challenges, that we felt it's important just to settle whether, at least on the inputs and with smaller players, where the real focus is, whether there is anything playing out. And if we are aiming to grow this industry through the master plan, will that be a shared growth as well? The other factor in an inquiry is we are also empowered to make recommendations to government. And that has been a big feature of previous inquiries. So whilst there may have been recommendations around the private participants, and so again, this can be complementary. And that's why we do want the industry's engagement around not just the terms of reference and how to focus it, but also then in the process. I think industry has raised many questions around other challenges they face. And this is precisely a forum that can also take that on.
Ons sal dit daarmee los. Dit was James Hodge, die hoofekonoom van die Medediningskommissie. Nou op die lyn is Chris Skutte, hy is die uitvoerende hoof van Astral. Chris Skutte is die uitvoerende hoof van Astral en hy is nou op die lyn. Chris, baie welkom by die program. Wat is jou reaksie op hierdie stap van die Medediningskommissie?
Natuurlik redelik verbaas, veral in die dag en tyd waarin ons self bevind nou. So ons is eintlik verstom, ons as Astral, en ek verstaan van die ander spelers ook, en verbaas met hierdie klink amper na 'n aanslag wat na die industrie toe kom, en ja, dit kon nie op 'n slegte tyd gebeur het nie. Ek dink is duidelik gedokumenteer in watter situasie die industrie is, en al vir 'n geruime tyd, so is nie 'n korttermyn ding nie. Ons is onder geweldige druk van invoere en koste as gevolg van die staatsidentiteite wat nie hulle kan bring nie, van basiese dienste wat nie gelewer word nie, waaroor ons addisionele koste moet aangaan. Dis 'n baie kompeterende bedryf, en daarom is dit baie duidelik in ons marges en ons winste oor die afgelope 5 jaar, dat hierdie is nie 'n industrie wat homself verryk ten koste van die verbruiker nie.
Die een punt wat die kommissie maak is dat 63% van die mark word verteenwoordig deur 4 maatskappye. Dit is Astral, dit is Sovereign, dit is Country Bird en RCL. Dis 'n groot syfer, 63%. Dink jy daar is groot konsentrasie in hierdie mark?
Wel, ek dink as jy buite die industrie staan, dan mag dit so klink, maar as jy na enige ander industrie gaan kyk, dan sal altyd 3, 4 of 5 hoofspelers wat so gevorm het oor baie jare. Van die maatskappye in Astral is al 80 jaar oud. Dis nie iets wat gister gebeur het of oor daar onkompeterende gedrag is nie. Dit kom baie lank af. Die mense wat ons genetika verskaf, ons het die ander dag ons 50ste samewerkingsooreenkomsjaar gevier. So die goed vorm oor jare en jare en jare. En 63%, as jy na Amerika toe gaan, of jy gaan na die Europese lande, dan sal jy altyd maar jou klomp hoofstroom ouens kry, en mense wat in die industrie kom, of mense wat konsentreer op sekere geografiese liggings. So dit is nie noodwendig dat 4 of 5 spelers 60% vorm nadelig nie. Die kompetisie tussen daai spelers is ook so streng, en as jy nie dit het nie, dan kan jy dalk sien dat spelers wat in gesegmenteerde markte is, bo marginale marges gaan maak. Maar hierdie industrie is so kompeterend, dat jy draai jou sente om elke dag net om aan die lewe te bly.
Ek dink dis een van die punte van die Medediningskommissie, en James Hodge het dit ook nou net gesê, en dit is dat hierdie gevestigde maatskappye en die strekking van hulle teenwoordigheid in al die vlakke van die waardeketting maak dit baie moeiliker vir kleiner spelers om die mark te betree. Wat dink jy van daardie siening?
Maar hoe dan nou so? Gewoonlik begin jy in 'n industrie iewerste, of aan die begin of aan die einde of in die middel, en dan integreer jy verder, juis om jou kostes te bestuur. Nou hoekom bestuur jy jou koste? Is om bekostigbare produk op die mark te sit en 'n bestaan te maak en jou winste te vat en te herbelê in jou maatskappy of dan in 'n verdere integrasie. Nou dis wat ek persoonlik in die industrie al vir jare doen. Ek is 40 jaar in die industrie en indien jy winste maak, dan ploeg jy terug in die industrie en jy kyk altyd vir geleenthede waar jy kan geïntegreer opstroom of afstroom. Hoe kan ek verder integreer om my kostes en my produksieketting te bestuur? Nou dit is nie 'n ongewone ding nie. As jy byvoorbeeld na Amerika toe gaan en ons kyk ook na daai modelle of Brasilië, dan word groter maatskappye en die middelklas maatskappye word versoek om verder te integreer om koste te bestuur. Daar word ook gevra dat daar 'n groter konsentrasie moet wees, want dit is een manier om jou koste af te hou. Nou in Suid-Afrika, seker waar ons in die suidelike halfrond is, doen ons nou alles anderste om. Hier word ek elke dag deur die minister gekonfronteer, die minister van landbou, en sê, investeer in die industrie, investeer, groei en skep werk. Dan doen jy dit, en dan 'n paar jaar later sê iemand, o, jy's nou te groot. Al die wins wat ons maak, word drieledig versprei. Eerste betaal jou belasting, dis 'n derde. Die gedeelte wat oorbly, word gebalanseer tussen kapitale projekte om te integreer, of om jou produksieketting te verbeter, of om 'n reeks van ander voordele by te bring. En aan die ander kant, die geld wat oorbly word gewoonlik versprei na jou aandeelhouers wat oor jare in hierdie industrie belê het.
Uit die sake wat die Medediningskommissie in die verlede ondersoek het, was 'n kernpunt die onvermoë van kleiner spelers om 'n mark te betree, want die groot maatskappye beheer dit basies. Nou, dit is 'n siening wat James Hodge ook gehuldig het, en ek dink dit is die kernpunt van wat hulle wil ondersoek, en dit is ook 'n tendens wat mens kan sien uit hulle vorige ondersoeke. Hulle wil hê kleiner spelers moet kan 'n mark betree en meeding. En dan natuurlik elke bedryf het sy uitdagings en dies meer, maar ek het 'n vermoede dis waarop hulle gaan konsentreer indien hierdie saak nou van 'n ondersoek of 'n voorlopige ondersoek eskaleer in 'n volwaardige saak in.
Wel, hulle is welkom te kyk. Daar is geen beheer oor enige mark in Suid-Afrika. As jy kyk na hoe sterk ons kleinhandel kettingwinkels is, hulle moedig juis kleiner produsente dag tot dag aan om te produseer en hulle te nader, sodat daar ook nie 'n dominansie van enige aard van verskaffer in hulle wêreld is nie. So ek beleef dit daagliks dat kleiner produsente het al hoe meer toeganklikheid na die kettingwinkels toe. Hulle kan enige dag enige mark betree. Ek kan dit nie keer nie. Geen produsent in SAPA kan keer as iemand 'n mark benader nie. Natuurlik is daar sekere behoeftes. As jy nou gaan kyk na jou kitskosrestaurante, dan is daar baie hoë standaarde. Ons word deur die KFC's en die Nando's en die Spurs maandeliks geauditeer vir gehalte en beheer ensovoorts. So jy moet daaraan voldoen, en as jy nie daaraan voldoen nie, gaan jy nie in daai mark inkom nie. En dit kos alles geld wat hoender duurder maak. So daar is geen manier nie. Elke voermaatskappy in die land wat geïntegreer is in die groot spelers sit met spaarkapasiteit wat hulle maar te graag aanwend om voer te verskaf aan buiteprodusente. Nou daai kompetisie is so streng, niemand kan 'n bonatuurlike marge gaan verhaal daar in die mark nie. Die kompetisie is net te groot. En dit sal ons kan bewys in enige ondersoek dat hierdie is 'n kompeterende bedryf en daar's vir my altyd een toets. As ons hierdie massiewe winsmarges gemaak het, ten koste van die verbruiker of 'n ander speler, dan sou dit mos blootgestel word. Die feite lê in Astral se geïntegreerde jaarlikse verslag. Daar's 'n hele kostemodel. Dit wys daar presies wat ons wil, is geauditeer. So daar is nêrens vet in hierdie industrie nie. Dis 'n hond eet hond industrie van dag tot dag wat harde werk en 'n klomp fokus benader. Niemand gaan in hierdie industrie wat 'n hoë risiko industrie het. As iemand nou vir my sê na die huidige voëlgriep pandemie, hy wil nou in teelmateriaal gaan belê, dan moet hy baie mooi weer gaan dink, want dit is waar waar ons 600 miljoen rand moes afskryf sonder hulp van enige van hierdie regeringsinstansies wat wil ondersoek.
Chris, dankie vir jou tyd. Dit was Chris Kutte, hy is die uitvoerende hoof van Astral.
Jy het geluister na RSG Geldsaake met Moneyweb Potgoe elke weeksdag om 7 namiddag. Vir meer Moneyweb Potgoe, besoek moneyweb.co.za of laai die toepassing af en volg Moneyweb News om dagliks op hoogte te bly.